千里之行，始于足下. A journey of 1,000 miles begins beneath the feet. We now gather in the Tao to travel the journey together. Welcome to Tao Talks with Derek Lin, where we delve deeply into the Daodejing by Lao Tzu. Once upon a time, in ancient Greece, there was a king who ruled the kingdom of Phrygia. This king, well, he lived in luxury. He had this great castle surrounded by rose gardens. He lived in this great castle with his beloved daughter, the beautiful princess. The king reveled in his wealth, and his favorite thing, his favorite pastime is that he would often spend a lot of time counting his gold coins. As he was counting the gold coins one by one, he thought that he loved gold more than anything else in the world. One day, in his rose garden, the king found a satyr. A satyr is a half man, half goat creature. This creature, he recognized immediately, was actually Silenus. Silenus was a companion, a friend, a teacher to Dionysus. Dionysus was the god of wine, and Dionysus also was known by the name Bacchus. So this creature, Silenus, seemed lost and tired. So the king had him brought into the palace, lavished him with hospitality. So after a few days of feasting, drinking, resting, he had Silenus taken back to Dionysus, the god of wine. So the god had been worried about Silenus and was thankful to the king for the kindness in taking care of his friend. And Silenus was also the god's mentor as well. So the god Bacchus or Dionysus, to express his gratitude, he said to the king, "You may ask me whatever you wish, and it shall be granted unto you." He granted the king a wish. So the king, happy about this opportunity, reflected upon his favorite thing in life, gold. Despite the luxury in which he lived, no amount of precious jewels or splendid finery and luxuries seemed like enough. He really just needs more gold. More gold was what he was really after. So he said to the god, "I wish that everything I touch turns into gold." Upon hearing this, Dionysus was a little skeptical. And he asked the king, "Are you sure about that? You should probably think about your wish carefully." But the king insisted, "No, no, that's what I want. Gold is what I want. Gold and more gold." So Dionysus, the god, thought, "Well, I did promise that I would grant him whatever, so I'm going to go ahead and grant this wish." So the king was ecstatic. Back in his palace, he turned to all of his possessions. At his lightest touch, the palace walls transformed into solid walls of gold. He extended his arm, touching a small table. That small table also immediately turned into gold. He touched a chair. He touched a door. He touched his bathtub. They all turned into gold. So he ran around in a frenzy, laughing to himself, handling each item, everything he could get his hands on. Soon, the palace was full of gold. The king's laughter echoed off the golden walls. Gold. I love it. Then, hungry from all that running around, the king looked for something to eat. He saw a bunch of grapes, so he picked it up to eat them, but he almost shattered his teeth biting down on the gold. The fruit had turned to gold at his touch just as quickly as everything else that he had touched, so he couldn't eat that. So then he tried a loaf of bread. It too hardened into gold and was not edible, did nothing for his hunger. So he was so exhausted, he decided to lie down in his bed. At his touch, his bed turned to gold. His plush pillows had also transformed into solid gold, giving him no rest at all, hurting the back of his head. He cried out in frustration. I can't eat anything for my hunger. I can't get any rest for my fatigue. What is going on? Now, hearing cries of frustration, his daughter, the beautiful princess, entered the room to see what was wrong with her father. The king was happy to see the beloved princess and hugged her, but then looked at her with horror upon the realization that he had frozen her into a golden statue. So this was when he finally realized his mistake. The king realized that what he loved more than anything in the world was not actually gold, was actually his daughter. His daughter was the most important thing. So he begged Dionysus to undo the golden touch. What he thought was a blessing was actually a curse. Dionysus, shaking his head, thinking, I told you so. He took pity on the foolish king and decided to tell the king that, well, if you wish to undo it, you have to go wash your hands in the river Pactolus. So the king followed this instruction, went to the river, washed his hands. He saw gold draining from his fingertips. And this, as the god had promised, had the effect of undoing the power that he had been granted before. When he returned to the palace, everything had turned back to normal. That is the end of the story of the king's touch. And the king, as you would probably guess, is King Midas. This was the story of King Midas from Greek mythology. It's where we get our expression, the Midas touch. Now, this story, as you can tell, was meant to be a cautionary tale. In other words, the foolish king, King Midas, do not be like Midas. Be careful what you wish for. But nowadays, people perhaps don't really recall the original intent of the story, that it was a cautionary tale. So the Midas touch, the expression the Midas touch, that the king thought was a blessing turned out to be a curse. Now we are using the expression the Midas touch in a positive context. When we describe certain people as having the Midas touch, we're actually praising them. It's intended as praise. We're saying that everything they touch turn into gold. Their business prospects turn into gold. Their stores prosper. Their investments increase in value. Their creative works become popular. Everything they touch turn into gold as a good thing. we forget that in the original story, it's the very opposite. The lesson is the very opposite. The original concept was that it's a curse in disguise. What brought about the curse was the king's insatiable appetite for gold, his greed, or his lack of contentment. So we can actually see a very easy correspondence between King Midas to Daodejing chapter 44. Take a look at this. Line 2, the self or wealth, which is greater. The intangible aspects of the self includes your relationship with other people, your love for others, for the king, his love for his daughter. Wealth, in the case of the king, is gold. He cared for gold more than anything else. So he initially thought that gold was the greatest of all. Later on, he realized no, his love for his girl, his daughter, was the greater of the two. And then line 3, gain or loss, which is more painful. Very good illustration. We assume that a gain in gold or monetary resources will be a good thing, a happy thing. We see in the story of King Midas that it's actually a painful thing. We assume losing the ability to turn everything to gold might be negative. To the king, was actually overwhelmingly positive. It was actually not the painful of the two. And then line 4, excessive love must lead to great spending. What that actually means is that obsessive love must extract a heavy price. So for him, obviously, his obsessive love for gold is what drew the heavy price out of him of almost losing his daughter. So hopefully, as you listen to the story, you were able to discern the underlying pattern and then apply that to your own life. That's what the Tao is all about. If you are able to do that, and the more you study the Tao, the more skillful you become at this ability to discern the underlying patterns. A lot of people ask me, hey, what about the I Ching? And I tell them the I Ching is about the discernment of underlying patterns in life. When you can master that, you've become your own oracle. You become the master of your own destiny. You can design and author your life in whatever way you want. It all begins with the discernment of underlying patterns. Let me illustrate that by comparing the story of King Midas with the story of the horse lover, so you can see how we would pick out those reiterated patterns. So this slide is called the King's Touch, Parallels of East and West. East on the left-hand side, the horse lover, story from Zhuangzi. On the right, King Midas. So on the left, we have the man who loved horses too much. On the right, we have the king who loved gold too much. So we begin to see the parallel. Number 2 is the manifestation of obsession. In the story of the horse lover, we saw that he went overboard in using the best in caring for the stallion. And Zhuangzi described this as, a basket that was a luxurious item, a container made of seashells, using those to contain the horse dropping and urine, going totally overboard. For the king, the manifestation of his obsession was his demand to the god Dionysus to grant him the wish to turn everything into gold, because he must have more. That is the obsession. So that's the commonality between the two. Then, in terms of patterns of the stories, we've got the turning point. The turning point is a pattern where in the horse lover story, he saw this fly that landed on his horse, his beloved horse, so he slapped the fly. That is the turning point. And for the king, the turning point is running around, turning everything into gold. So initially, the horse lover slapping the fly had a sense of satisfaction, like, how dare you touch my horse? This will teach you a lesson. For the king, running around, turning everything into gold, initially had a feeling of satisfaction, like, look at all this gold. I have more gold. But then, number 4 in the pattern, the negative consequence hits. For the horse lover, it was getting kicked by the horse, this powerful kick, dead center, this painful kick. For the king, it's the horror in realizing that, oh no, I have just turned my daughter into a statue. Have I just killed her? Now, in the horse lover story, there's a tragic ending. The horse lover is killed by the powerful kick. The horse doesn't even realize what's going on, goes back to eating. And in the story of King Midas, there's a happy ending, that he was able to pull back from the brink of disaster, had everything go back to the way it was before. This is sort of like in a life pattern where you are able to realize your folly in time, in recognizing that you have neglected, for instance, your health, your family relationships, your connections with good friends, and therefore you stop in time, you pull back from the brink, and you're able to restore and heal those elements that you had neglected before. If so, more power to you. In Greek mythology, King Midas had other manifestations of foolishness. His story actually goes on. So he didn't necessarily have an overwhelmingly positive ending riding off into the sunset. But here, just in the context of the patterns in the two stories, this is where we depart. This is where we basically say that, what if you continue on with your obsession, you basically end up suffering from your folly. And then to the right-hand side, if you are able to stop in time, then you can pull back from the brink. There's still hope. And that's actually the great theme for us today, is to stop in time. If you realize that you are heading down the wrong path, and you are able to stop yourself and turn back around. Our meeting has come to an end, but the journey continues on. Let us travel safely. Until next time, may the Tao fill you with peace and happiness.